At 6:40 on a rain-dark November morning, Elena Ruiz knelt beside a black penstock, one wet glove wrapped around a brass pressure gauge. Across the fence, two neighbors watched from beneath a corrugated shed roof. They had already told her the same thing. Buy more panels, buy another battery, stop wasting weekends on a creek that looked too small to matter. Elena opened the valve. The pipe kicked against its timber cradle. The needle climbed, then held. It would take one frozen intake, 2 battery alarms, and a midnight meter reading before anyone understood why she had measured water before buying more solar. Elena's case is a worked composite, not an observed biography. The cabin, weather, and neighbors give the engineering a human spine. The head, flow, output, and safety numbers come from Department of Energy guidance, U.S. Geological Survey conversions, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission rules, and a published equipment design example. The question is real. What can a small stream do when the sun is gone? Elena's cedar cabin sat above a narrow creek under fir trees. In winter, the meadow lost direct sun early. Her electric ledger, after conservation, came to 7.2 kilowatt hours on the worked design day. Heating and cooking used other fuels. The electric load covered the refrigerator, lights, communications, controls, tools, and a modest water pump. The ordinary answer was a larger solar array and more storage. That answer was not foolish. Solar was already useful on the property. But more hardware would not fix a resource question Elena had never measured. The battery alarm had sounded twice during a wet week. Each alarm arrived after dark, when the panels were silent and the creek was loud enough to hear through the kitchen wall. Another battery could store more energy, but it could not create the missing refill. Sam, the older neighbor at the east fence, gave her the only warning that stuck. "A larger empty battery is still empty," he said, then handed the story back to Elena. Her contrarian move was cheap because it was not a purchase. She borrowed a pressure gauge. She marked a bucket. She carried a stopwatch. Then she measured the creek on 3 cold mornings instead of treating one bright day reading as truth. The neighbors saw delay. Elena saw the first responsible decision. She began with flow. For a small channel, the equipment manual describes a simple test. Direct the water into a container of known volume and time the fill. Larger flow can be checked with a temporary weir. Elena repeated the bucket test, wrote down each interval, and watched how much water remained in the natural channel. The stopwatch button clicked beneath her thumb. Then she measured head in sections. A water-filled hose and pressure gauge can show the vertical drop, but each section has to be added carefully. She repeated the route because a single reading can flatter a hopeful builder. By the 3rd pass, the numbers stopped moving. Flow and head were not interchangeable excuses. Weak flow could not be repaired by wishing for more pressure. Low head could not be fixed by a glossy turbine label. The site either carried enough usable water through enough vertical fall, or it did not. Elena also checked the timing of the resource. November rain made the creek loud. Late summer flow made the decision. The Department of Energy warns that stream flow varies by season and year, so one measurement is not useful enough for final design. A turbine chosen from the wettest afternoon could become a silent ornament in August. The cheap survey had become a filter. It could reject the project before trenching, pipe, wire, or machinery made the mistake expensive. The Department of Energy says microhydropower depends on 3 things: head, flow, and equipment efficiency. Head is the vertical fall. Flow is the volume of moving water. A turbine and generator turn that falling water into electricity. Elena was not trying to replace every source on the property. She wanted to replace the long overnight gap when solar produced nothing and the battery carried the whole cabin. The published equipment example began with 120 feet of gross head over a 1,000-foot pipe run. At 30 gallons per minute, the 2-inch polyethylene pipe lost 17.7 feet of head. After allowing for the intake and fittings, the manual rounded the working point to about 100 feet of net head. That distinction mattered. Gross head is what the hillside offers. Net head is what reaches the turbine after friction takes its share. Elena walked the route with a survey pole. The creek smelled of wet stone. Orange flagging tape trembled at each change in elevation. A straight line on paper became 1,000 feet of roots, bends, mud, and places where trapped air could steal pressure. This was not free energy. It was a site with a measurable drop. At about 100 feet of net head and 30 gallons per minute, the manufacturer's design example lands near 300 watts of continuous output. 300 watts sounds unimpressive beside a row of solar modules. That comparison confuses power with energy. Power is the rate at one moment. Energy is that rate carried through time. 300 watts, running for 24 hours, makes 7,200 watt-hours. 7.2 kilowatt-hours. That matched Elena's worked winter day electric load. The reveal was already sitting inside basic multiplication. A modest continuous source can do more daily work than its nameplate suggests because it does not wait for sunrise. The comparison still needed discipline. A real turbine stops when flow falls, an intake blocks, a bearing fails, a pipe freezes, or maintenance is ignored. Transmission and conversion losses reduce what reaches the loads. The 300-watt figure is a design point from the equipment manual, not a guarantee for an unmeasured stream. Elena wrote the number on brown paper, then drew no victory circle around it. First, she had to prove the creek could hold the flow. The expensive conventional alternative was not given a fake price. A complete solar and storage quote changes with location, batteries, mounting, freight, labor, and code. A complete microhydro build changes with pipe, trenching, access, turbine, controls, wire, civil work, and permits. Elena compared decisions, not imaginary totals. Option 1 was to buy generation and storage before identifying the winter shortfall. Option 2 was to spend several mornings measuring the resource, then decide whether any equipment belonged on the site. The second option won before a turbine was ordered. The flow test also exposed the scale hidden inside a small creek. The U.S. Geological Survey says 1 gallon per minute equals 1,440 gallons per day. 30 gallons per minute means 43,200 gallons move through the diversion in one day. The system would return that water downstream. It did not consume 43,200 gallons. But the number explained why an intake could never be treated like a private straw. Fish, habitat, downstream users, minimum flow rules, and water rights existed before Elena's battery problem. At the tool shed, she laid the physical path in order. A screened intake kept stones and leaves away from the nozzle. The penstock carried water downhill. A stop valve isolated the turbine. A pressure gauge showed static and running head. The generator fed a controller. When the batteries were full, a diversion load gave continuous power somewhere safe to go. That last part surprised the neighbors. Solar can be disconnected from a full battery by its controller. A hydro generator still being driven by water needs a managed load. The manual warns that system voltage can rise when output has nowhere to go. Elena marked the diversion controller and dump load as required parts, not optional polish. She also marked maintenance access. An intake hidden below a steep bank would be ignored during sleet. A turbine without a dry cover would age faster. A pressure gauge that could not be seen during operation would turn every diagnosis into guesswork. The smallest responsible build had to be serviceable by a cold person carrying a flashlight. The dark moment arrived in January. Wet leaves froze against the intake screen. Flow at the turbine fell from 30 gallons per minute to 10. In the worked reconstruction, the meter that had promised 300 watts sagged near 80. The manufacturer's continuous output table shows the same neighborhood. Roughly 100 feet of head, 10 gallons per minute, about 80 watts. 80 watts across 24 hours makes 1.92 kilowatt hours. The cabin needed 7.2. The daily shortfall was 5.28 kilowatt hours. The battery alarm sounded at 11:17. A red indicator washed the utility room wall. The inverter fan stopped. Rain clicked against the metal roof, and the house went quiet enough for Elena to hear ice moving inside the pipe. For 10 minutes, the neighbors looked correct. The turbine had not disproved the method. It had proved the catch. Continuous power only stays continuous when the water path stays open. Elena closed the stop valve slowly to avoid water hammer. She opened the bypass, cleared the screen, checked for trapped air, and left enough water in the creek. The equipment manual warns that debris can block a nozzle and that a hydro system needs a diversion load when batteries are full. Small did not mean casual. Before restarting, she checked the legal gate again. FERC says some projects need a license or exemption when federal jurisdiction conditions apply. An uncertain developer can contact regional staff or file a declaration of intention. State, local, environmental, and water right requirements still matter even when a federal exemption may fit. The smallest responsible microhydro system is not the smallest turbine found online. It is the smallest system supported by minimum seasonal flow, verified net head, a safe intake, correct pipe, proper electrical protection, a controller that can handle continuous input, and a legal path. Elena's starting checklist fit on one workbench sheet. Measure gross head 3 times. Estimate pipe and fitting losses. Measure flow in the driest credible season, not only after rain. Keep environmental flow in the channel. Match the turbine to net head and usable flow. Plan the intake, shut-off, pressure relief, electrical protection, dump load, and maintenance access. Check permits before disturbing the watercourse. Replacement. Load. Cost. Catch. Starting point. The Field School 5 turned a romantic creek into a decision. At 11:58, Elena opened the valve again. Water struck the runner inside the small turbine housing. The meter climbed past 80, then 180, then 270. At 300 watts, the needle settled. The utility room held a low mechanical hum. A lamp stayed warm above the sink. The battery indicator stopped falling and edged upward while the cabin load dipped below generation. Elena waited through midnight. The sun was 6 hours away. The creek kept working. The before board showed the conventional instinct: more panels, more storage, and an unmeasured winter gap. The afterboard showed the measured path: 100 feet of net head, 30 gallons per minute, 300 watts continuous, and 7.2 kilowatt hours across a full day. The creek had not beaten solar. It had beaten Elena's habit of asking one source to solve every hour. By spring, the two neighbors did not copy Elena's turbine. One property had too little head. The other creek almost disappeared in late summer. Both would have made poor candidates. They copied her order of questions. One borrowed the gauge. One built a temporary measuring weir. Both checked seasonal records before shopping. The neighbor with low head kept his solar plan. The neighbor with weak summer flow began with load reduction and a smaller backup design. That was the ripple. Not 3 identical machines, but 3 households avoiding the same blind purchase. Elena hung the stained workbench sheet beside the utility door. The cheapest component on it was still the first one. A measurement. Tell us where you're watching from and the time everyone said you were wrong.